Hello and welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are watching this. And especially welcome, Jeff. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, Jeff. Would you introduce yourself in maybe a few sentences so people know who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Jeff Gagno. I'm a product manager here at Neo4j, and specifically I'm the product manager for Bloom. And we had a major release of Bloom just a few weeks ago in December. So I'm here to talk about Bloom 2.0 and Bloom in general and graph data visualization on Neo4j.
Cool. I think that's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, Bloom is has been for me, as I think it's been one of the tools, if not, yeah, probably the best tool I always use when I share it, so, a graph in some kind of way with anybody else. It's like, hey, here, look at this, and it's like very visual, very approachable, very easy to understand, and then it's like a first step into the world of graphs if you're not as technical as some people are. So I think, yeah, it's a great tool. I'm looking forward to that. As ever, this session is supposed to be interactive. It's live, so that means if you have any questions, dear chat, please post it. Let us know what you think. Let us know where you're watching this from, if if nothing else. But if you have any questions, if anything comes up, if you have a good experience with Bloom, if let us know if you had some good sessions in a Bloom demo or in a Bloom environment you have used. Share in chat. We're always interested to hear that and read that, and then we will read that out aloud for everybody else. Yeah, and I think with that we can dive in. I'll switch over to this. So you have Jeff, you have prepared a few slides, but then, like I said, we will try to make this interactive and fun. So we won't only show slides today. So, but we need to do some slides as well.
Yeah, of course we do. So I'll try to, if it's possible, Alex, maybe we can switch back and forth between the slides
Yeah,
and the demo a few times so that we don't have to do all the slides at once, and then yeah, it'll be a little bit more interesting.
sounds good.
And hi to John. I see that you're joining us from the UK, and I'll mention as well that I'm joining from Canada. So I'm based in Ottawa, and it's a very cold day here today. I think we have minus 26 degrees Celsius. So
Ooh, oh,
happy to be
that is
sitting inside
cold.
doing this webinar instead. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of hot tea or coffee, I guess. Uh,
Excellent segue. Actually, I've got my coffee right here. I hope no one minds. That helps keep me warm. So I guess we
yeah.
can get started going through some of the slides. And for this live stream, I'm going to be talking about Bloom 2.0, of course, but I'll be talking more about Bloom in general because I think there are probably lots of folks who may not be familiar with the product, and there might even be folks joining who aren't super familiar with graph visualization at all. So we'll talk about it from a very introductory level, and some of the features I'll discuss have been around for a while, and then some of them are new in Bloom 2.0, like histograms and scene saving and sharing. So without further ado, we have just a few sort of quotes here or blurbs about graph visualization and about Bloom, sort of orienting it in terms of its raison d'etre. And I see we have a couple folks here from Germany as well, so welcome to you. Yeah, so Bloom is intended really to help people who aren't extremely technical or who maybe don't want to learn Cypher or write code to interact with and understand the value of a graph database. And it also helps people who are technical and do write Cypher communicate what they found or the value of information that's in the graph database. So one way to sort of describe that is to say that Bloom streamlines conversations and projects across teams, and it has what we like to call an illustrative codeless search to storyboard design. So that makes it a great interface for non-technical project participants to share in the work that some of the more technical folks on the team might be doing. So we like to think about our personas as analysts, data scientists, and developers primarily. And analysts could include domain specialists. So you could be talking about executives in an organization. You could be talking about people who are specialists in any number of domains, from anti-money laundering and fraud detection to cybersecurity, to supply chain management, and the list just goes on and on. So Bloom gives graph novices and experts alike the ability to explore and investigate their graph data from different business perspectives. And it's a turnkey solution. That's another sort of point about Bloom, is that it works out of the box. It comes with Neo4j, and you don't need to do any special configuration. There are a lot of use cases where developers will build their own graph visualization for a project or a product they're building, and Bloom might be useful in some contexts to avoid having to do that, depending on exactly what you need. I'll take a few minutes now to talk about the graph database concept in general. So for many of you, I apologize if you're quite familiar with this, but there may be folks again on the stream who aren't so familiar. So this is just an image, not from Bloom, but it's a visual representation of a graph database. And you can see 3 circles, and those circles are nodes, and you can see 2 arrows, and those arrows are relationships in Neo4j parlance. So the nodes can have labels attached to them. And the leftmost node you can see has a person label and an actor label, and you can have more than one label attached to a node. And the relationships likewise have labels, and they can be directed or undirected. And in this case, we've got 2 directed relationships. The one on the left is the acted in label is applied, or we could call it the acted in type. And on the right-hand side, the arrow is pointing to the left, and that's a directed relationship. So what we have here is a data model describing the movies data set, which you can go and download from neo4j.com. We have a system called Desktop that includes Bloom, as well as the Neo4j Community Edition database and our browser application. And one of the sample data sets that you can get with that is the movies database. You can also access it from DB free, and you can access it from our sandbox, which is available on neo4j.com as well, which is a really great way to get familiar with this kind of stuff. So in this sample database, we have other types of nodes with labels for movie, for example. And notice the node at the right-hand side is another person node, but it doesn't have the actor label. So the point there is that you can have, again, multiple labels on a node, and in some cases you might have a node that's a person and also an actor, and in other cases you might have a person who's not an actor, so the actor label wouldn't be applied. And these are all decisions that you make at sort of the data modeling stage. We won't be talking about data modeling or data ingest in this live stream, so we're going to assume that you have your data already, and we're just going to be using Bloom to explore the data and talk about Bloom specifically. But this is just a little review of what would be represented in a typical graph in a Neo4j database underneath Bloom. And we'll look at a few different examples. Today I have a retail data set. I also have an ICIJ data set that was updated in late 2021. So ICIJ is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and they've been working with these data sets called the Paradise Papers for quite some time. There have been a number of news reports about them. The data set itself is available on the ICIJ website in Neo4j dump format, so you could create your own database, and it's also available, again, if you download Desktop or use our sandbox. I believe we've got ICIJ data available there as well. And a lot of the data in that data set is, representing legitimate companies and actions, but there have been some really interesting media reports out of investigations into that data set as well. So we've got that, as well as retail, and there may be 1 or 2 others that we'll look at today. So we're moving quickly from the very abstract graph data model concept into, here's a picture of Bloom, and we'll look at Bloom in more detail via the demos today. But you can see here what we call the scene in the middle, where you've got all of the nodes and relationships displayed. And then on the right-hand side, we have what we call our legend panel, or our styling panel. And there you can see the different categories of nodes. Thinking back just to the last slide, the nodes had labels on them. In Bloom, you assign categories to nodes, and often it's a one-to-one relationship in lots of use cases. So in this example, we have an address and an entity are the top 2 categories, and those map one-to-one to node labels of address and entity. you can have multiple categories in Bloom. So if you've got a node that has an actor and a person label, then you could have separate actor and person categories as an example. So yeah, so that's what Bloom looks like. We'll see a lot more of that today. And I'll mention just quickly here as well, for those interested, that Bloom does come in two tiers. There's a basic version, which is free, and again, you can download from our website. And then there's a full access or enterprise version that you can have if you have the enterprise version of Neo4j, and there's an additional fee that goes along with the full access version of Bloom. So just to quickly go through what you get in both versions, you get near natural language search. We'll talk about the different ways that you can run searches and do some demos of those. You can do exploration, so what we call ad hoc exploration workflows, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So expanding nodes would be an example of something you could do in both versions, or finding shortest paths between nodes. You can use both versions with a local database, but there's a big differentiator here in that you do need the full access or enterprise version of Bloom to use it with a remote database. So if you want to use it with a database that's not on your local system, you do need the full access version. You also get scene saving and sharing, which is a new feature in Bloom 2.0 that I'll talk about a bit later. And you get a different way to store perspectives in the full version. So in your basic version of Bloom, we have a concept of perspectives actually in both versions. And the basic version stores those perspectives locally in your web browser's storage, whereas the full access version of Bloom will store perspectives as well as scenes if you're using scene saving and sharing in the database itself. So that's one of the functions or features that the enterprise version of Bloom provides. And the full access version also lets you control who can access Bloom through sharing and authorization. And we have role-based sharing of scenes and perspectives as well in the full access version. So that's just a quick overview of the two different tiers.
So,
Today I will be using the full access version, but most of the features that I'll be showing you are available in the free version as well.
and Jeff, when you get Bloom right for free, basically, if you're using Neo4j or ORDB, if you have that, or if you use desktop, even the free tier for ORDB free, basically. Which version do you get with those?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yep, you're right. You alluded to it. So if you're using OraDB Free or OraDB Professional, you're getting the basic access version of Bloom right now. And if you download Neo4j Desktop, you get the basic access version of Bloom with that as well. So if you are interested in the enterprise version, you would want to reach out to our sales team and or reach out to your sales rep if you're already a Neo4j customer.
Cool.
Great. So yeah, and again, if anyone has questions at any time, feel free to just drop them in the chat, and we'll try to keep an eye on it and get to them. I see we have a few more folks joining from London, Seattle, so welcome. Glad to have you join us. The next thing I'll talk about, I'm actually just going to get into some features and demos here, are perspectives. So perspectives are a concept we have in Bloom that let you sort of divide the graph in the underlying database into business views, we call them. And in the image here, we've got the typical Northwind database that's been around for quite a while, and it's been used in relational databases, and we use it for graph databases as well to sort of just demonstrate the data model and how it could look. And we have, maybe a dozen different types of nodes that are expressed as categories here based on their labels for the graph. And for Bloom, we might only be interested in looking at a subset of that. So we could divide this up by category and say we're interested in having maybe a shipping view of the graph that contains information related to shipping products, and a purchasing view of the graph that contains information just related to purchasing. So perspectives are a way to declutter the graph and show only the relevant parts. They can also be useful to help organize workflows. So there's a blog post that I wrote a couple weeks ago about integrating Bloom into your workflows. And one of the great ways to do that is perspectives. Perspectives store information about what types of labels and categories you want to have, but they also store things like default styling for those types of nodes and relationships. and they store what we call search phrases, which we'll talk about today too, which are a really powerful way to use Cypher and make it available to people who might not want to write Cypher. So you can create custom queries in Cypher that you can then launch from Bloom's near natural language search bar, just using a natural language phrase that the search phrase defines for you. So we'll talk about that too. And those are part of perspectives. So without going too much further into the slides, Alex, I wonder if we could switch over to, or actually I am going to switch over to a different screen.
Yes, we can do that. That's not a problem.
Okay, great. So I'm just getting that up.
Yep, here it is.
Thank you. So this is Bloom. And I'll take a minute just to go through what we're looking at here. This is called the Perspective Gallery. And if you have the enterprise version of Bloom, this might be what you see the first time you launch it. If you have used it before, then it might launch into the previous database and perspective that you most recently used it with. But in this case, I have it set up so it would appear as though I haven't launched it yet. And we've got this perspective gallery. Now, I will point out if you're using the desktop version or the Aura free version, I'm quite sure you won't see this perspective gallery as the first thing when you launch Bloom. We have something called an auto perspective that should automatically create a perspective for you based on the underlying data, including all of the nodes, types, all of the labels. But for the enterprise version, you'll see the perspective gallery first. And in the free version, you can get to the perspective gallery very easily using a button on the top left-hand corner that I'll show you very soon. But first, I'll just sort of go through what we have here in the perspective gallery. So we have a list of databases here, first of all. So there are a few different databases we'll be using today. I mentioned the ICJ database. There's a retail database we'll look at now. I also have a Twitter data set we'll look at that's derived from Neo4j's Twitter account. And you can switch back and forth between databases within the DBMS that you're connected to using this drop-down box in the perspective gallery. Right now, I'm on the retail data set, and we have some information about it over here to the right. So I see that it has 28,000 nodes, about 1 million relationships. The nodes are divided up amongst 5 labels, and there are 8 types of relationships. So this is giving us some information right away about what's in our underlying data set. And if you're a no to low code user of a graph database, then this could be very useful information for you right away. It's also showing us the version of the database. So I'm using Neo4j 442 for this demo, but the databases could be of different versions, and that could be useful info. We also have a button over here that lets you import a perspective. So I mentioned earlier that with the full access version of Bloom, you have the ability to store the perspectives in the database itself. But with the free access version of Bloom, you can't do that, and the perspectives are stored in local storage. So you can actually export perspectives as JSON files and then import them into Bloom, even if you're using the free version. So that's a potentially useful function as well. So what I'm going to do is create a perspective out of this data set. I have a couple of options here. I can use generate perspective, or I can create a blank perspective. A blank perspective is pretty self-evident, so we'll do that in a minute. But first, I'll create a perspective using this generate perspective button. And what Bloom will do is look through the database, identify the labels, and it will try to create categories for each label. So that's what it's done. And you can see here that we have 5 categories and 7 relationship types that were automatically picked out of the database. And the categories are listed here. So we have item, customer, transaction, country, and category. So if I click this 3-dot drop-down menu here, I have the option to rename the perspective, to delete the perspective, or to export the perspective. And this is the function you could use now if you wanted to share this. If you had the free access version of Bloom, you could export your perspective, and then you or somebody else could import it using this button into a different instance of Bloom running somewhere else. So the first thing I'm going to do here is rename this one, and I'm going to call it all labels, because this perspective includes all of the 5 labels that are in this retail data set. So then if I click Use Perspective, it brings us into Bloom, and we can see here in this perspective drawer the 5 labels that we have, and we can see there are different sections along the top here as well. So these are the categories. We also have relationships. So these are the 7 relationships that the auto-generated perspective picked up. And then we have search phrases, and we have this option for sharing, which would only exist for the full access version of Bloom, which lets you share this perspective based on roles with other users. So right now it's only available to people who have the admin role in this database, but I could create roles and assign them different permissions and assign users to those roles, and then I could share this perspective with the full access version using this tab. If we go back to the categories tab just for a minute and look at each of the different categories listed, we can see, starting with item, that this category is for nodes that have the item label. And these are properties that exist on those types of nodes. So in this data set, extensive use has actually been made already of Neo4j's graph data science library. And so we have some values here that have been applied by GDS algorithms like closeness, centrality, and PageRank. So I won't go into too much detail about that right now, but I'm just pointing that out, that those are some of the properties on this label type. There's also a description. We could imagine that's a description of the item being stored here in the database. There's a stock code. And then there are these GDS options as well. Now we can look at the customer label, and we see, again, this category includes all nodes that have the customer label on it, and we only have 2 properties that Bloom identified for this type of node. So a customer ID and a Louvain community, which is another GDS output. So already you can see how Bloom is starting to help orient you to the data in the database. If you haven't seen this database before, whether you're a developer who is very comfortable with code and knows Neo4j and Cypher inside out, or whether you're a graph novice or a domain specialist with lots of experience in a domain, but maybe not a lot of the technical knowledge around how to write Cypher, Bloom can help you out in all of those cases, just to orient to the database, understand the data that's in it, and get a sense of what's there and how you want to start organizing it. So that button I just clicked actually brought me back out to the perspective gallery. So I'll show you that again. There are 2 ways I can go back. I can click this X, or I can just click on the perspective again to go back in. So this button on the top left opens and closes the perspective drawer, but then this set of sort of 9 circles brings us back to the perspective gallery. So if you are using Bloom in the free access version from desktop or from Aura, and you didn't enter the perspective gallery the first time you opened it, you can just click this button here. So open your perspective drawer and then click this 9 dots, and that will bring you out to the perspective gallery. Okay, so we've auto-generated a perspective that includes all the labels for this retail data set. Now what I'm going to do is create 2 more perspectives that are a bit more focused, and I'm going to use the blank perspective feature to do that. So first I'll create a blank perspective and I'll rename it, and I'll call this one the customer view. And we'll store information in here about customers. So I'll go to use perspective. It's blank. We have no categories assigned yet. I'm going to add a category. Here's the list of the categories that Bloom found in the database based on labels on the nodes. So since we're interested in customers, I'm going to include customer, of course. And I'm also going to include country. And I'm also going to include transactions. So let's start with just those types. Now, if we go through, there's an option here to decide what we use as a caption. So the transaction ID is set right now as the caption for the transaction, so maybe that's okay. And for country, we only have 1 property called name, and we're using that as the caption. That's okay. And for customer, we're using customer ID as the caption, so that's okay as well. But we could, customize those as we wanted to. So now we have this perspective and we could start doing things with it. I will show you this quickly. We can go into a little bit more detail about this later, but this is the styling panel, and we have default styling here set up for this perspective right now, just based on Bloom's automatic selections. But we could customize this if we wanted to. Maybe we want countries to be green by default, and customers to be blue, and transactions to be we'll make them orange. So there are other styling features here. We'll go into a bit more detail later. So I've done that. Now I'm going to go back out to the perspective gallery, and I'm going to create one more perspective on this data set. And I'll do a blank one again. And this one is going to be, we'll call it the transaction view, or the item view, let's say. So we've got a customer view and an item view. Go back into it. Again, it's blank. And we're going to add items and categories, and we'll say transactions as well, in case we're interested in knowing what transactions happened with any given item. And I'll just quickly go through here again and make sure I'm happy with the captions that have been selected. And everything looks okay. Okay. So I'm going to pop back to the slides here. That's all I'm going to say about perspectives for now, and we'll look at another set of features.
So while we set this up, if anybody has questions in chat, please let us know. Here we go.
Okay, so that was perspectives. The next thing I'm going to talk about is search. So there are 4 key ways in search, and they are full text search, which can be performant depending on whether you've got some full text indexes on your database. Sometimes they can be pretty slow if you're searching for things that aren't indexed and you've got a lot of data in the database, but it is there as an option. We also have what we call a graph pattern search, and that is really quite powerful. And that lets you search for things based on how they're connected. And I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. It's really something that's best described by trying out or by seeing a demo. But there are all kinds of ways that you can execute graph pattern queries in Bloom. I see a couple of questions here coming in. I'll just quickly see if I can answer any of them. There's a question about CSVs in rows and columns. Is there a way you can generate relationships by parsing the data? So there are different ways you can do that. And if you do some searching online, you'll find a few different examples. But depending on the structure of your underlying data, you may need to make some changes. But there are different ways to load data into Neo4j. We have a load CSV function, and that's maybe a little bit outside the scope of the Bloom webinar. But the answer to your question is yes. There are lots of ways you can import that data and get relationships from Neo4j.
I just put in the link to the guides how to import CSV in chat. So
perfect.
That's
Thank
a
you.
good way to start.
And we also have a question: is there a way to view the visualization of the graph schema? And the answer to that is yes. And actually, I think I might have some code floating around here that will help us do that. So if you can hold on to that question, and maybe if you can remind me, Alex, we can try to do that a bit later.
Yep.
Okay, so then back to search. So full text and graph pattern we talked about. Also, you can search for property values. So we saw on the retail data set, we had lots of different properties on our node types. And you can search for nodes that contain a property with a specific value. So I'll show you how to do that as well. And also, we have these search phrases that I mentioned earlier. So those are a really powerful feature where you can write some cipher code, and then you can actually use a near natural language phrase that you associate with the cipher code to execute that query. So that's a really neat feature as well. So I'm going to pop back into Bloom, and we'll have a look at the ICJ dataset just to change things up a bit instead of the retail dataset. And we'll try some of these different types of search. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my perspective gallery, and I'm going to change databases to ICIJ 2021. And for this database right now, I only have one perspective, and it contains all of the labels. We have some more information about this data set. And again, you can get this from icij.org. We've got almost 2 million nodes and about 3.2 million relationships with 15 relationship types and 5 labels on the nodes. So looking at this data set, we've got an entity, an intermediary, an officer, an address, and other. So these are the different types of nodes. And then the nodes have different properties on them as well. So you can see that entity nodes have like quite a few different types of properties. We have intermediary nodes. We have officers. Just a few examples here. You've got a name, a node ID. You've got countries, country codes. You've got an end date. And then we have addresses as well. And other, it looks like we've just got, a collection of different property types to capture other types of information that maybe don't fall or haven't yet been categorized into one of these different types of categories. So now we want to talk about search. And if I come back in here, I have some things on my scene already. So I'm just going to right click here somewhere where there's no node or relationship and select clear scene. So that'll clear my scene. And now I can come up here to what we call the near natural language search bar. And the first thing I'll try is just a full text search. So I'll see, for example, if there are any nodes that contain the text Smith. And Bloom will actually try to do predictive suggestions as you enter your search query. And for this term, it didn't find any label types that matched. So it doesn't think I want to do a graph pattern search. So it's come up with a full text search is really the only option here. And I'm going to search for that, and we'll see what we get. So we've got 1,000 nodes, and this is a good opportunity to point out as well. If we look here in the settings on the bottom left, there's a little gear icon. We have a node query limit, which is set by default to 1,000. And that's why I got 1,000 nodes back. So there are probably more than 1,000 entities in this database that contain the term Smith, but my query limit is set to 1,000. You can increase that up to 10,000. So Bloom will allow you to visualize up to 10,000 nodes. We don't go higher than that at the moment.
Is this because of hardware limitations? The better graphics card you have, the more nodes you can visualize, or is there a good way, best practice kind of a recommendation how to limit that number to a certain threshold?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's a limitation based on basically the ability of the GPU to keep up with the visual information on the screen. Bloom is run locally, and in terms of minimum system requirements, we work with Firefox, Chrome, and Edge, and we strongly recommend a dedicated GPU. So it may work in cases where you have an onboard or on-chip GPU, but it works much better if you have a dedicated GPU. And if you're interested in looking at 10,000 nodes at a time, it would be really helpful to have a dedicated GPU. The default is set to 1,000 just for wide compatibility.
Yep.
But you can go higher, and yeah, maybe one day we will go higher than 10,000. But right now, I think a combination of performance and use cases requiring that sort of made that a natural limit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if we look at some of these nodes, they should all contain Smith somewhere. So if we take, for example, this entity, we can just go on a little bit of a hunt here and see if we can find you'll have to maybe take my word for it, but it's here somewhere, but I don't see where yet. Maybe it's in the address. So that one is a bit of a mystery. Let's have a look at a different one. So this one's a bit more obvious. It's Weinstein Smith LLP is in the name. And we can see some more obvious ones over here as well, Smith White Associates. I'll also point out here that we're seeing on this entity, we've got the name as well as the countries listed as the caption. So if we go back in here and look at the entity, we should see countries and name checked off here as captions. And those captions will apply to both what's shown on the node when you're zoomed in. Of course, when you zoom out, the captions disappear, but also what appears on these tooltips. So you can use the tooltips even if you are zoomed out. And entity nodes should always have a country and a name as long as they have those properties associated with them. We don't enforce that the nodes need to contain all the same properties. But if they do have those two properties, they'll show up in the tooltip, even if you're zoomed out. So that's a full text search. I'll clear my scene here again, and I'll clear my search box. And now we'll look at a pattern search. So this is the one I mentioned is best demoed or experimented with directly. But let's say we're interested in finding entities that have more than one address. So one way we could do that query would be to type an address, and that's being recognized as a category type. So I just use the tab button to accept that suggestion. And now I want to see addresses that are linked to entities. And again, that's being suggested as a potential search here. So I'll hit tab. And I want to do entities that are connected to more than one address. So I'll connect it to address again, and I'll run that query. And we should get entities and addresses. And in every case, there should be at least two addresses connected to an entity. And that's what we've got here. So we could look maybe over at this, this group of three if we were interested. And that is a graph pattern search. So we could also add some constraints. For example, let's try something a little bit more complex. Let's say if we wanted addresses that were in a particular country, we could do a property restriction here, and we'll say, oh, let's say Australia. Okay, so this should search for entities connected to addresses that are in Australia, and we'll see if we get results like that. And we do. So that's a combination of a graph pattern search and a property search, which is the next one I was going to show you. So I guess I've kind of demonstrated both of those. But you can also do a property value search without a graph pattern. So if I was, for example, interested only in officers, let's see if there's a country. Yeah, so with the country code of, let's say, CAN for Canada, we'll see if we get any results. So it looks like we did. So that's an example of doing a graph property search. And then the last one we had was the search phrase. So again, if we come back up here to the perspective drawer and we look at search phrases along the top, you'll see a list of any search phrases that are associated with this perspective. And in this case, I have one search phrase ready to go just to demo. And the first thing that you would have here is to type basically what the user would type in the search box to execute this search phrase. So this says entities incorporated after $date with previous name $old name. And we use the $signs here to indicate that these are values that the user will enter. So it's a parameterized query. Then you can have a description here. So this will show up in the search bar underneath the suggestion. And then you have the cipher query. So this query will actually match entity nodes where the incorporation date is before the date entered in the search phrase and where the original name contains and the old name variable that I enter here, and return those nodes. Down below, we have information for the suggestion engine. So as you type this search phrase, you'll get to $date. And we have the option here of saying, okay, do we want to suggest any dates to the user based on that parameter? And we can do it either with no suggestions, or in this case, we're using a label key. So we're saying, okay, for any entity node, use the incorporation date property to suggest date values that could be entered into this field. And we're doing the same thing here with original name. So we're saying for any entity node, use the original name property to suggest values that could go into this $old namespace when someone's entering the query. We have another question here. Sorry, I'm not keeping up totally with the questions, but once you construct one of these patterns, can you see the cipher that is generated in order to represent that visual? So Bloom doesn't offer an elegant way to do that, but maybe a trick you could use would be to look at the Neo4j query logs, and you would see any queries that Bloom had generated to generate its result set. So that's one way that you could do that. And then we have another question here about what about the new MacBook Pro Max laptops? I haven't tried them. I bet they would work pretty well. I'm using a MacBook Pro myself, and it works quite well, although I don't usually use 10,000 nodes. Okay, so let's try out this search phrase. So if I start typing E, the search phrase will come up as a suggestion, and I can actually tab through the first part of the phrase itself, entities incorporated after. So I just hit tab and that gets filled in. And now we're seeing some dates being suggested here from the auto population that I was just talking about. So some of these dates are pretty old, but let's say we're interested in entities incorporated after 1990, let's say January 1st. And we're interested in ones that have the previous name. Let's say, we're getting suggestions here again, but let's say investment. Okay, and so if I run that, this will actually execute the cipher query that was associated with the search phrase. And we're getting some results here. So we should see all of these entities if we look at them. And again, I've done this, I think, a couple times, but I'll just explain. If you double click on a node or a relationship, you get this detailed view. And this is called the inspector. And it lists all the properties. And it also shows us what type different properties are. So this is a date type you can see by the icon. This is a string you can see by the icon, which is ABC. It might be a little bit difficult to see. And we have this edit functionality as well. So you can click here and change values, assuming you have those permissions on the underlying database. So in this case, we searched for entities incorporated after January 1st, 1990. So here we can see the incorporation date of this entity is 2010. And we wanted a previous name investment. So that was looking in the original name field. And here we see that there was an original name for this entity, RM Investment Fund Limited, which actually looks like it's the same as the current name in this case, but that's one of the results of this query. So that's a pretty simple search phrase, but you can imagine that they can get pretty complex. And yeah, here's another example where the original name is the same as the current name, or it appears to be, but that's not the case in, of course, all of the data here. I will also show you we have this option in these settings. So again, if you come down to the bottom left and click the settings button, one of the settings here is experimental features. And if I turn that on, we get this little lab beaker here as another option. And if you click that, one of the things you can do for search phrases is allow write transactions. And this isn't really something that we advertise or promote a lot, but it's an experimental feature. And if anyone's interested in playing with this, I'd be keen to hear feedback from folks. And you can send us feedback through canny.io. So if we come down here into the About section, is it in the About section? There is a place here where you can actually Yeah, if you click where it says, please report any issues here, you can go into canny.io. We actually take feedback from there as well. So if anyone has a chance to try this out, I'd be interested in hearing your experience and how you're using it. But if we allow write transactions and we go back in here to our search phrase, then we have this new button that shows up where we can say it's a write transaction. So if you had use cases where you wanted users who were duly authorized to write to the database to be able to execute queries in this search bar that would result in things being written back to the database, then that would be one way you could do that. So again, that's kind of a new experimental feature, and we're curious to hear how and if people use that kind of functionality. All right. We have another question here. Does Bloom 2.0 support GIS visualization? And are there any examples of this in use? So I'm assuming you mean like mapping visualizations. And if that's the case, right now, no. So you can explore geographical data using Neo4j if it's stored, as lats and lons. But in terms of plotting things on a map, Bloom doesn't currently support that at this time. We do support different types of layouts, but only for nodes and relationships. And the two types of layouts that we support right now are the one that I've been using, which is called a physics-based layout, but I'll just demonstrate another one. So if we look at maybe the entity address graph again, and certain types of data are better suited than others for this, but another option here, if you click this button just above what we call the mini map, then you can switch to our hierarchical layout. So this will show things in a hierarchy. So those are the two layouts that we support right now. And then we do support styling and sizing of nodes differently. So that's just another way to visualize. And I can switch back to our physics layout just by clicking that same button again. All right, so we'll go back to the slides and go through a few other things here. Thank you, Alex. So that was searching. Now I'll talk a little bit about this ad hoc exploration workflow that we build Bloom to support. What do we mean by that? Well, there's this workflow where people might be looking for something. They might know exactly what they're looking for. They might not. And we have different ways to support search and refining the search. We've looked at 4 different ways to search. Then you can visualize your results. You can arrange things the way you want. You can do styling. And then you might want to filter down to a subset. And then you might want to take an action. An action could be expanding a node, looking for a shortest path between 2 nodes, looking at clusters. You might want to edit some information. And finally, you might want to collaborate. You might want to save your work. You might want to share your results. So that's what we mean by an ad hoc exploration workflow. And these are the types of things that Bloom is built to support. And here are just some images of a few little features that we have that do that. But more interesting than that would be to dive back into the demo and have a look at Bloom and try some of these things out. And thank you again, Alex. Okay, so what do we want to look at here? I guess I'm going to switch to a different database again, and we'll look at Neo4j's Twitter data. So I've got a couple of perspectives set up for this one. Just some of the stats here for this graph: 43,000 nodes, 56,000 relationships, and 7 label types and 9 relationship types. So I'll just jump into the all labels graph here, the all labels perspective. And we've got some stuff already up on the screen, but I'll just clear that out. And we'll start with maybe looking at hashtags and tweets. Okay, so we've got a sample of some of the hashtags and tweets that appear in this data set. We can zoom in, we can see hashtags are orange. Again, you can refer to the legend panel here to figure that out and change the style if you want. So we've got, a data science hashtag, and we've got these tweets that are currently captioned by the date and time that they were tweeted. We can look at the inspector and see the actual tweet itself. So let's say we want to explore this data a little bit. I'm going to zoom out here, and I'm going to find a section that interests me. I don't know, let's say this little grouping up here. It's pretty interesting. So let me actually just take some of these nodes and get rid of the rest. So if you long press, you can highlight multiple nodes by dragging a selection. And if you right click on one of them, you can dismiss other nodes. And that will leave you with just these on the scene. It's a little bit easier to deal with. So now let's say I'm interested in this grouping here. We've got a hashtag called master data. We've got some tweets that use that tag associated with it. Let's look at this one. So we've got a tweet here with information, and let's say I'm interested in seeing what else this tweet's connected to. So if I right click on it, I can choose expand. And you can see here that there are 4 relationship types associated with this tweet. And I can choose all of them, or I can choose to just show the types that I'm interested in. So in this case, I'll select all, and we'll see that that gets expanded. So that's one example of an action we can take to explore the graph, and we can continue to traverse through this if we want. So we see that Neo4j is a user. Again, I can consult my legend panel here, and maybe I'm interested in seeing what else that user has done. So I can see if I looked at the follows relationship, there would be 35,000 nodes showing up here. Maybe I'm just interested in the mentions relationship. So I can click that, and we'll get those results on scene as well. And another thing we can do is try to reveal any relationships that might exist between nodes that are already on our scene for which we don't have relationships currently showing. Now this one can be a bit tricky. We'll see if we have any luck here. Sometimes you have nodes on scene that do have relationships that aren't shown, and sometimes you don't. So I'll select quite a few here and right click on one of them. And we see we do have the reveal relationships option showing up here. So again, this will show us any relationships between the selected nodes that aren't already visible on the scene. And you can see that there are lots of different relationship types here that aren't already visible on the scene. So maybe I'm only interested in the posts relationships. We've got 91 of those, so I'll click that, and we should see those fill in here. So that's another helpful way that you can explore your data. While I have this data set open, I'm going to talk about the different ways that we can actually use rule-based styling to understand the data better. So let's get some more users on the scene to do that. I'll clear my scene, and we'll do a search for users that are connected to tweets. And let's say hashtags as well. Okay, so as everyone knows, in Twitter, users have followers. So if we look at this user, we actually don't see any. We might not have that data for everyone. So for Neo4j, we can see that it has 34,000 followers at the time that this data was taken, and it was following 10,000 users. So maybe we want to adjust the styling of users based on that. So if I click the icon next to user in the legend panel and choose rule-based styling, I can add a rule-based style. And I want to do it for followers on the user nodes. And we see this histogram. So this is a new feature in Bloom 2.0 that's available in free access and full access. And you can see that we have 146 nodes on the scene that have between 2 and it looks like a very large number of users. And then we've got things sort of becoming, much less voluminous as we move down to the right. So that's kind of what we would expect. And let's say I'm only interested in seeing, or actually let's use the size option here. And we'll do a range rather than a single value. And we'll say we want nodes to be 4 times bigger if they have the maximum number of followers based on a 1x size if they have the minimum number of followers, and Bloom will automatically fill in the minimum and maximum for us here, but we could adjust these if we wanted to. And I'll click apply size. And then we can see in our graph right away, we've got some users that have lots of followers. NASA is one, that's no surprise, with 44 million followers. And we've got some nodes down here that are a little bit bigger that have, large numbers of followers, but not so large. Actually, these ones don't seem to have that property. That's interesting. But that's one way that you can use rule-based styling. And if you look over here, we have a filter option as well. So we can actually filter nodes out. And if we're looking at maybe hashtags, and these hashtags don't have any numerical properties. So we look at tweets and favorites. So again, you can favorite a tweet, and tweets might have, 0 to many favorites. And we have a histogram here again. So we're seeing we have 462 tweets on scene that have between 0 and 3 favorites. And then as the number of favorites goes up, we have fewer and fewer tweets. So way down here on the extreme, we've got 1 tweet with between 69 and 72 favorites. So let's say I'm only interested in seeing nodes that have more than 50 favorites, let's say. And we can adjust the slider here, or we can type in the number that we're interested in. And then we can apply the filter, and you'll see that those tweets that don't meet the criteria have gone away. So if we look for purple nodes that are remaining, here's one, and we've got 72 favorites, so it's matching the criteria that we set. We're running short on time here, but I've already gone through mostly everything I wanted to talk about. The other thing I do want to make sure I touch on is scene saving and sharing, because it's a major new feature in Bloom 2.0. So I'll dive right into that. And this button here that I've just clicked under the filter is your scene panel. And again, this will only be available if you're using the enterprise full access version of Bloom. But if you are, that button will be there, and you'll see your list of scenes. So you can see here I have 2 scenes, untitled scene and untitled scene 2, and I can switch between them. Maybe I don't need this one anymore, so I can delete it. This is the one I was just working on, and I'm going to actually rename this one, and I'm going to call it tweets with likes, and we'll save that. Now I might want to do something different. So I'll save this work and I can come back to it later. But in the meantime, I will add a scene. Now I have untitled scene 2, and I'll just call this maybe my scratch pad. And this is where I'm going to do some just experimental work. And I'll save that. So now we can come back into the scene and we can do, whatever kinds of queries that we're interested in. We can also adjust styling. So the perspective does have its own style. I'll note here on the bottom of the legend panel, we've got another button which lets you choose whether you're adjusting perspective style or scene style. And again, this will only show up when you're using the enterprise version of Bloom with scene saving and sharing. But right now, if I make changes to the style, those will get saved to this scene, my scratch pad, but they won't change the styling in the tweets with likes scene. But if I switch this to perspective style, then any changes I make here to the style will actually change the default style of the perspective. So when you create a new scene, then the styling will have the styling that you set here. This option is only available to you if you have the rights necessary to actually edit the perspective, which can be controlled with role-based access control and perspective sharing in the enterprise version of Bloom. We also have up here, if you have the scene saving and sharing function, a button that lets you choose whether you're editing or viewing. So by default, if you are able to write to the database, this will be in the editing state. But if you select viewing, then you can actually make changes to the scene and they won't persist. So if I wanted to change the color of hashtag to gray, that's all well and good, but since I'm in view mode, if I come back over here to tweets with likes and then switch back they should not still be gray because, so they've gone back to orange because I was in view mode. However, if you are in view mode and you make a change or a bunch of changes, and then you notice you're in view mode, simply switching this back to edit mode will cause those changes to persist. This is really important because we have this option now to share scenes. So if I wanted to share this tweets with likes scene with one of my colleagues, could use this button that we've had for a few versions. It lets you export a CSV or a screenshot, and those options are both available still for the free version of Bloom. But if you have the enterprise version, you'll have this third option, which is to share the scene. And you can share it based on role. Now, this database has only an admin role, so I can add that. But if we had other roles in this database, like an editor role or a reader role or custom roles, then you could share the scene with anyone having those roles using this dialog. And then they would see those scenes in this tab of the scene list called Shared with Me. And one idiosyncrasy of that functionality right now is that when you share a scene, that scene is available in read-only mode to the person or the group you've shared it with. So anytime they open that scene from that panel, it would be in view mode. If they actually wanted to make changes, then what they could do is duplicate the scene, and then they would have their own copy in My Scenes, and they could save their changes there, and then they could share the iterated version with somebody else. So I think we're a little bit over time, and I'll pass it back to you, Alex. I think that's most of what I wanted to cover for today, but if we have any other final questions here, we can take a look through the list.
Cool. Yeah, I think I had one question, and then I see one or two other questions. Back in the beginning, you said about the export of perspectives. What is included in this export? Does this contain only the scene you set up, or is this also the styling? Is this the search phrases? Is this all of it, or only parts of it?
Yeah, so it's only parts of it, kind of. So if we look at these perspectives, let's look back at the retail data set. So we've got a customer view and an item view here as two different perspectives. So if we export these, we'll actually get a JSON file, which we could import into Bloom somewhere else. You could email it to someone or use a different web browser or something. What you would get would be the definition of which categories are in the scene and the caption information associated with it. You would also get the search phrases if there were any, and you would get the default styling and any default rule-based styling that had been applied to that scene. Mm-hmm. You would not get scenes, so your scene list would be empty. When you import that perspective, the scenes are stored separately. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Cool. I think, but that's very, very powerful then. So you can set up everything for somebody in terms of styling, in terms of search phrases and everything else, and then just basically importing this, and then they can start with it from a predefined point, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, this can be very powerful as well. If you think about another feature we didn't have time to talk about today is deep linking. So you can actually custom craft a URL that links to a Bloom instance in your organization. You might be hosting it on a web server or with the Bloom server plugin if you have the enterprise full access version. And you can use these links to launch Bloom in a specific perspective and with a specific search that's been run. And that search can be a search phrase. So if you have an organization, you may have spreadsheets that go out to fraud analysts every day, or you might have an internal application that fraud analysts look at every day with alerts. And you could actually create a link there with a custom URL that would launch Bloom and run a particular search in a specific perspective with specific styling for that user. So that could be quite a powerful function when it's chained together with perspectives and search phrases.
Cool. And then there are two more questions. We kind of link a little bit to the schema question we had earlier. I don't think we have time for that, but is like a statistics spreadsheet view, and Ramesh asks, is there adding, I think he means charts, like bar charts or line and pie charts, and is there some kind of things we would It's more like an analysis of the graph instead of visualizing the graph, I guess. But is that something we are thinking of?
Yeah, so we are thinking of that. Bloom doesn't do that right now. We did add histograms in 2.0, and we think that's a step in that direction. We are thinking about that. So we're, a lot of BI tools out there are very focused on aggregation and summarizing data. And Bloom is very focused on the nitty-gritty details of the data in your graph and getting to very specific information very quickly, even if you have very complex questions. So it's a little bit of a different use case from most sort of BI dashboards where you're summarizing and aggregating a lot. But there is definitely value in marrying those two functions to create like a really powerful suite of tools that could be used a little bit on both sides, or to further empower this ad hoc exploration workflow that we have. So it's not something we can do right now, but it's something we're thinking of and moving in that direction. And histograms is an example of sort of a very initial start in that direction.
Cool. That's going to be exciting. But for now, yeah, 2.0 is available. Everybody you can check it out, like we said, right? The free version for everybody in Aura DB free as well as in desktop, and in the enterprise edition, if you are a subscription user, then reach out to us and let us know if you are interested in that. I'll post the summary blog post in chat just now to finish us off. Basically, if you want to know exactly what Jeff just showed us today, and you would read up about it, you can do so there. Yeah. We hope you enjoy Bloom. Let us know what you think of it. If you have a cool visualization screenshot, share it on Twitter or anywhere else. Hashtag Neo4j, and we would be excited to see your graph visualizations and Bloom scenes on the social media world. And yeah, with that, I think thank you all for watching. Thank you, Jeff, for presenting and for showing us through the features and the demo. Um, and
Yeah,
yeah,
it was a real pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining.
exactly. Thank you for joining. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. And we'll be back with a session tomorrow on PHP, same time as this one started. So you can watch more Neo4j stuff tomorrow at 5 p.m. CET. Until then, take care and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.